this is why I want to date these guys, but this is abortion. I don't know.
Well, boy, that gets to the point. We learned about 5-paragraph essays in school, Naomi, and I understand your thesis statement's supposed to be at the intro, but I don't know if you're supposed to like immediately pounce on the audience or wait a few seconds.
I think you're supposed to immediately pounce. That's how I always did it. And that's why I failed humane letters. I didn't fail humane letters. That's all.
That's a good point. Yeah, so this is a reaction to some recent going-ons surrounding abortion in the United States. We might touch upon other countries, but mostly other countries are like, oh yeah, back up the truck, get as many abortions as you want. Not a problem. We're decriminalizing everything. So
except for really Australia
of this episode. I don't really consider Australia a country.
Oh, okay. Well, moving on.
I'm here to alienate our Australian listeners. It definitely exists. Don't get me wrong. It feels more like a state. I'm not saying part of the United States. It just has the vibe of like a Kentucky or a Tennessee or something. You know what I'm saying?
Kentucky or Tennessee. Both of those are states within the United States, and they're both possibly abandoned.
I'm saying vibe-wise.
Vibe-wise.
Okay, we'll move on. Naomi,
no, Kentucky has too much incest flair.
God damn, we're alienating every part of the world. Besides Croatians, we do love Croatians. Croatians have elevated us. Naomi, we're here today to discuss abortion and our thoughts on abortion and hopefully provide some decent tips and strategies to navigating this new terrifying landscape. And we should probably say before we begin, we're going to be edging into like controversial topics. And I don't think our like political stances on things have been secrets. I don't think we've done a very good job of keeping our convictions to ourselves in the other episodes we've recorded. This one's just going to be a little more on the nose. I was taught a while back that if you're interacting with people, there's an acronym to remember to both things you should talk about and things you shouldn't. So the things you should talk about are FORD, F-O-R-D, and that's family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. You know, what's going on with your family? You know, fun stuff going on with the family. What's your family like? Occupation, you know, what do you do for work? What's going on at work? Recreation, what are you doing for fun? What do you want to do for fun? And then dreams, you know, what are you aiming for? Short-term, long-term, etc. And the things you don't talk about are PAIR, politics, economy, abortion, and religion. And I think we're going to talk about all 4 of those in this episode in some capacity. So yeah, this is really the weed out episode. This is the one that gets half of our viewership to stand up and say, you know what? These people weren't super conservative after all. I want my money back.
I would like to say that while we're recording this, Naomi does have COVID. So I don't know why I just talked about myself in the third person. So if I have some like really outrageous, like usually I do have outrageous stances on things. If I just say something outrageous, it's due to COVID brain. It's like, you know how women are like, oh, I have pregnancy brain. This is COVID brain.
I feel it's worth mentioning that too. We're a little late to the discussion. Like
we're beyond late. Yeah.
What prompted this was about a week and a half ago. A draft opinion from the Supreme Court was leaked. I personally have the belief that a conservative leaker leaked it, and there's a couple of pieces of evidence supporting that. Look it up online. It's very interesting discussion. But basically, the Supreme Court said, hey, we're thinking about overturning Roe versus Wade. And the Supreme Court has not said in public statements yet, oh, that was just, we were just having a larf. We weren't seriously considering it. So it's taken us a while. Part of it's due to Joel being busy at work. Part of it's due to Naomi being sick. We do genuinely care about this issue, but we felt that if we did an immediate reaction episode, it would just be us being like, God, everything sucks.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of that we were at for a couple of days. Like it was just like pure awe, the fact that like so many things were tumbling down. Like I feel like so many things, like we're going back to literally the fucking Gilded Ages. Like nobody got the Met Gala theme like the Supreme Court. Like the Met Gala theme this year was Gilded Age, and the Supreme Court was like, we got it. But
the rich tone deaf, I disagree.
The main issue that we were seeing before recording this was just the fact that like both of us were just extremely pissed off and burnt out about talking about this subject, because both of us are so passionate about like, keeping women's reproductive rights and like making sure that women feel like humans in the country that they live in. So it took us a little while. form thought.
I feel I should mention that I was genuinely not expecting this. Like, I thought that at most the Supreme Court would potentially allow certain restrictions to stay in place, not like banning abortion or giving it back up to the states, but basically saying, oh yeah, states, you can implement your 6-week or 8-week abortion ban. And in my mind, the mental kind of barrier I'd formed around it to not, freak out was like, oh, well, that sucks, but that's part of this long line of restrictions that have been added. It's not the end of the world. It's worth opposing, but like, this won't destroy America. And I guess I don't want to make this issue about me, but I do feel it's worth apologizing, because I think there's many men in my position who are like, it sucks, but it's not the end of the world. And because of that mentality, it kind of now is the end of the world. And I think this is potentially a wake-up call for a lot of people about the impacts making abortion illegal will have on everybody in society, the impacts this court decision will have on our politics, and the limitations of our democracy and where we need to go from here. And so it sucks. It sucks shit. It's really bad. I don't like it. But I do feel that like it's really given me a perspective on this issue being important. And I definitely think a lot more of my energy is going to be dedicated to it moving forward. I should also mention, Naomi, that we have a Patreon. And we don't make a huge amount of money from our Patreon, but for the next couple of months, indefinitely, we're donating all the money we receive from said Patreon to pro-abortion causes. There's a couple of different groups that we support. Of course, we love Planned Parenthood, but there's some that are focusing explicitly on giving abortion aid and access to women in states where they effectively have no ability to get an abortion. And so, yeah, that money's going straight there. We're not saying this so that you pat us on the back. We're saying this because we're trying to put our money where the mouth is and not doing things like buying new insulation for our recording studio and instead giving to a needy cause.
I don't feel like there's a reason for us to have an installation or a recording studio, because it would just be a really ugly kitchen.
Sound dampening.
Okay.
Get all of it.
I would like to say that my little 2 cents on this is that like this isn't like an issue of like, oh, if you're pro-life or pro-choice. This is more of like if you're pro-woman or anti-woman. That's how I feel at this point, because this is like an all abortion ban. If you were raped, if there was cause of incest, if there was unviable pregnancies, this is an all around abortion ban. And I think that needs to be talked about, because as a woman, like, okay, let's just say this does pass, this goes through. This is extremely possible that it does. Me as a woman, if I get pregnant, like I've had some issues with my reproduction in the past. So there is a possibility that I might not have one or multiple unviable pregnancies. So not being able to, have that as a backup plan, in the sense that like if I would have to put my life on the line in order to give birth, or in order to, just continue a pregnancy, is extremely off-putting to the thought of pregnancy in general. But the fact that some people are coming forward, politicians are coming forward and wanting to ban IUDs and condoms as well, is indescribably disgusting to me. And it's just day by day, I'm slowly processing through it and coming to terms with the fact that this isn't just pro-life, pro-choice. It's pro-woman, anti-woman, basically.
And I think, and we'll touch upon this in more detail, this is not a purely women's issue. It's a persons with uteruses issue. It's a women's issue. It's a men's issue. It's an everyone issue when you start looking at how this is going to impact other Supreme Court cases and how other states are looking at further legislating people's lives. So I think let's just briefly say, we're going to be discussing the political impacts of this, how this is going to perhaps play out in the next coming weeks and months. We're going to be talking about kind of how people should react and the things that should concern them about this. And then some potential solutions / things to help mitigate the damage. And we have discussed this issue before. We had another episode where we discussed some opportunities to get abortion access. I believe when the Texas started passing down more stringent abortion bans. Yes. We'll touch upon some of that briefly, but yeah, look back on that episode for some like really tangible advice. So Naomi, without further ado, I do want to discuss the immediate impacts this is going to have. So the opinion basically says states will have the ability to decide whether or not Roe v. Wade is enforced, and that has some immediate consequences. So if Roe versus Wade is overturned, there are 23 states, including Arizona, where abortion would likely be restricted post-Roe. There could be more. This was a Politico article that was published, looks like on the 3rd of May by Dan Goldberg, and this was after it was released. But basically, the Guttmacher Institute estimated as of April that in 2019, 58% of American women of reproductive age, about 40 million, lived in states hostile to abortion rights. About 35%, 24 million women lived in states broadly supportive of such rights. But these are states: Arizona, Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, North and South Dakota, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. So it's a pretty big swath of the country, and unfortunately, we are caught up in that as well. Now, the consequences would fall primarily on those in the southern and Midwestern states who lack the means to travel to other states or whose family or work situations would complicate such trips. Calculations released last year by the Guttmacher Institute, which is an organization we've referenced many, many times, they provide some really impressive statistics, found that under the post-Roe scenario, the average driving distance for a Mississippi woman aged 15 to 44 to reach a clinic would increase 387% from 78 miles to 380 miles each way. Of course, that doesn't even account for the fact that some states that offer abortions do so under very stringent terms, so that you have to do it within a specific time frame and you have to wait 48 hours between the initial consultation and the procedure. So basically, somebody now has to take several days off of work in order to get an abortion, and they have to do so potentially, if you're in Texas, without anybody being alerted of this happening because of the bounty law. Now, there are states and the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., which have laws that would protect the right to an abortion. So the Guttmacher Institute has a couple of graphs that show what would happen. There are some states that explicitly do not secure or protect the right to abortion, but others that do protect abortion prior to viability. Those are California, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Illinois, Massachusetts. I think Montana. I'm looking at state name abbreviations. I'm not completely sure what they are. Nevada, New York, Rhode Island, and Washington. And then there are 5 states that protect abortion throughout pregnancy. Those are Colorado, Washington, D.C., New Jersey, Oregon, and Vermont. So that means that there are a big chunk of people in the United States who do have protections under the state laws, but unfortunately, this does not extend to everyone. So this is going to have pretty big impacts. I think there's been a knee-jerk reaction to a certain swath of people on social media who I would say at best are ill-informed and at worst vindicative to an almost malevolent degree. And those people say things like, well, it serves the people in those states right for voting for the wrong people. And we've discussed this before, that's a really, really bad take. Everyone deserves healthcare access. Everyone thinks stuff can't happen to them until it does happen to them, and you shouldn't, bring unintended babies into the world or, subject women to unnecessary pain and surgical procedures as they attempt to get abortions. But also there's a significant chunk of the electorate within those states who have been disenfranchised, who have been gerrymandered out of the political process, who cannot afford to move out of those states. It is completely insane to condemn them for the geographical position they occupy. And I think we need to be really mindful. This is why abortion should be a federal issue, because everybody, despite where they live, should have the ability to have safe reproductive health care.
Any thoughts on that? Yeah, I think that's something I want to add to that is just the fact that you mentioned the fact that moving is expensive. People are like, oh, I don't want to live in this country anymore because of the issues that are people face every single day, not just women's reproductive health, but just healthcare in general. It sucks in this country. And so people that are misinformed often say, oh, well, if you don't like this country, then leave. And it's like, great, I would love to, but I can't because one, moving is expensive, and two, the price of like living in, let's just say, Europe is also pretty expensive. And yes, they do have universal health care and so many other great benefits for living there, but it's a huge issue to move across the world and not be able to see your family on a regular basis just because of a healthcare issue. So that's the first thing I would like to say. The
They
second
don't
thing,
have open borders, Naomi. They're not actively recruiting people. They want engineers, they want mathematicians, they want scientists. They don't want someone who has like a fast food job. So
exactly.
there's a huge chunk of the population who, even if they want to move it, even if they can afford it, Europe isn't going to take them.
Yeah. So that's another issue as well. The second thing I would like to say is that the vast majority of people that are saying like, oh, I'm pro-life, or oh, I'm pro that, like whatever they're saying, it comes from a place of like not of not being educated. And I found that a lot when you watch these videos online where they people are being accosted while protesting on a street corner by these people that are like, oh, well, I'm pro-life and I had my baby and it all turned out okay. It comes from a place where these people are saying, oh, well, I'm pro-life because they had their kid and it all turned out okay. That's not necessarily always the what happens. There's a lot of people that go into poverty by having one extra kid. There's a lot of people that live in poverty and get pregnant, and that will put them into a place where they're homeless. There's a lot of people that say they're pro-life are ill-informed on these issues because of this like propaganda that's fed to them by their church or their friends or their family, where the biggest thing that I've heard was that like they think that abortions are like a woman gets pregnant, she's 9 months pregnant, and the doctor will come in and rip the baby out and tear the baby's limbs off or something like that. And that's what they think abortion is. So like the fact that all these people don't necessarily understand, and I'm not saying it's everyone, I'm not saying that everyone that's pro-life is ill-informed, but I would say that the vast majority of people that are one way or another don't. And I'm not saying, oh, I know everything and I'm informed and educated on all of these things, but I would say that the vast majority of people aren't fully educated on what an abortion is and how it is healthcare.
Yeah. The Politico piece I cited talked a little bit about when abortions actually take place. So in 2019, based off of the reported abortions, they broke down when they actually took place. And so abortions that were of fetuses that were 6 weeks or earlier, there was 211,000 of those. 7 to 9 weeks, 178,000. 10 to 13 weeks, 66,000. 14 to 15 weeks, 15,000. 16 to 17 weeks, 8,500. 18 to 20 weeks, 8,000. And 21 weeks, 4,882. So less than 1% of abortions even take place after 21 weeks. And the vast majority of those are not because someone's, starts becoming flippant and is like, oh, I just don't like babies and I want to murder children or whatever. It's because of viability, where the doctor, as you were touching upon, says, hey, it seems very likely this is going to have, issues that will lead to death. It'll have health complications. It's going to have these problems. And so the parent, even if they really want children, makes the decision to not have that. Right. So a lot of people, I think you're right, are under this impression that abortions are done by kind of lackadaisical individuals, not realizing that it's a very tough choice for a lot of people. And that's why it ultimately needs to be a choice and not a mandate, because, you have all sorts of messed up options that can arise if abortion is banned, where people whose like fetal the fetus inside of them is literally rotting away, can't get it removed for fear that they'll be accused of, having a miscarriage or, causing an abortion. And that has killed people before. But that's the sort of thing that happened when abortion was illegal, when abortion was, highly regulated, when abortion was this thing people only talked about in hushed tones and was performed in back alleys and whatnot. It's messed up stuff where women are forced to risk their lives in order to not be prosecuted for things that may not be their fault. It's great. It's horrible. So I think to also hammer home the point that this is very much a federal issue, I feel it's worth emphasizing that Republicans are planning a nationwide 6-week abortion ban. So the Washington Post had an article on May 2nd of this year by Carolyn Kitchener discussing what the GOP is working on. I should mention for our podcast listeners who are sort of ill-informed about national politics, the political environment is not great for Democrats in the coming election cycle in the 2022 midterms. Typically, the midterms go very poorly for the party in power because the party in power is the one that's visible and the one that the opposition party can say, hey, they're screwing up, so it's worth voting them out. Also, there's a lot more seats that are competitive that involve Democratic candidates than there are involving Republican candidates. So basically every forecaster is thinking right now, Republicans have the edge in winning the House and the Senate. Will that change? I don't know. But like that's what everyone's forecasting. It would be stupid to presume otherwise and try to plan your entire like abortion strategy around, oh, the Democrats are going to retake the House and everything's going to be fine. So this article says leading anti-abortion groups and their allies in Congress have been meeting behind the scenes to plan a national strategy that would kick in if the Supreme Court rolls back abortion rights this summer, including a push for a strict nationwide ban on the procedure if Republicans retake power in Washington. The effort, activists say, is designed to bring a fight that has been playing out largely in the courts and state legislatures to the national political stage, rallying conservatives around the issue in the midterms and pressuring potential 2024 GOP presidential candidates to take a stand. The discussions reflect what activists describe as an emerging consensus in some corners of the anti-abortion movement to push for hardline measures that will truly end a practice they see as murder while rejecting any proposals seen as half measures. Activists say their confidence stems from progress on two fronts. At the Supreme Court, a conservative majority appears ready to overturn the Roe versus Wade decision that has protected abortion rights for nearly 50 years, an outcome that was reviewed late Monday when Politico published that draft opinion. Also, activists argue that in Texas, Republicans have paid no apparent political price for banning abortion after cardiac activity is detected around 6 weeks of pregnancy. While a number of states have recently approved laws to ban abortion after 15 weeks of pregnancy, the limit established in the Mississippi legislation at the heart of the case pending before the High Court, some activists and Republican lawmakers now say those laws are not ambitious enough for the next phase of the anti-abortion movement. Instead, they now see the 6-week limit, which they call, quote, heartbeat legislation, as preferred strategy because it would prevent far more abortions. In terms of misinformation, that's a really clever use of rhetoric by Republicans. Heartbeat doesn't mean they even have a heart. It means electrical signals are being detected in the fetus. Right. So they want to, conjure these images of, a tiny beating heart that's snuffed out. And that's like not the reality at all. They just came up with this term that doesn't match the like actual medical developments that are going on. This is a whole new ballgame, Kristen Hawkins, president of Students for Life Action, one of the country's biggest anti-abortion groups, said in an interview. The 50 years of standing at the Supreme Court's door waiting for something to happen is over. A group of Republican senators have discussed at multiple meetings the possibility of banning abortions around 6 weeks, says Senator James Lankford of Oklahoma, who is in attendance and said he would support the legislation. Senator Joni Ernst, a Republican in Iowa, will introduce the legislation in the Senate, according to an anti-abortion advocate with knowledge of the discussions who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss internal strategy. Ernst did not respond to a request for comment. One top advocate, Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the anti-abortion group Susan B. Anthony List, has spoken privately with 10 possible Republican presidential contenders to talk through national anti-abortion strategy. Most of them, she said in an interview, assured her they would be supportive of a national ban and would be eager to make that policy a centerpiece of the presidential campaign. And Students for Life Action, along with 9 other prominent anti-abortion groups, plans to send a letter to every Republican member of Congress on Monday, pushing them to embrace a heartbeat bill. This letter argues that a national 15-week ban would not go far enough. If we are not focused on limiting early abortions, we are not really addressing the issue of abortion at all. So that's fun. It's great that Democrats think that it's going to be fine if they don't legislate it federally, but Republicans think that they can legislate it federally. And I think that kind of shows how the two parties are thinking about those issues. Naomi, do you have any thoughts on that, or can I go talk about how much the Democrats are failing people right now?
Well, all I know about this heartbeat bill that's been passed around, God, for probably decades, is that or something along the same lines, I've been hearing about it for a very long time, is that when a woman is 6 months pregnant, there is a very low possibility that she actually knows that she's pregnant, unless she's tracking her cycle.
6 months or 6 weeks?
6 weeks, sorry. And so she unless she's tracking her cycle and she's intending to get pregnant, there's a very low chance that she actually knows that she's pregnant. Many people don't know that they're pregnant until they're about 8 weeks or 2 months along. So when they're trying to pass these like heartbeat laws, I'm putting these in quotes here. Many women don't even understand that they're pregnant yet or don't know that they're pregnant. And so it's taking away their possibility for choice before they even knew that they had to make one.
One great thing that I'm seeing too, and I'm sorry, I use that term in a sarcastic sense. I'm not trying to. Yeah, it's a phrasing. Yeah. One unfortunate thing that a lot of new anti-abortion bills are doing is removing exceptions for rape and incest too. So in the past, regardless of how reprehensible and far-reaching the bills have been, typically there have been exceptions for rape and incest because Republicans have argued that people's choices ultimately is what needs to be punished. And if somebody didn't have a choice, there should be a carve out for that. But now they're just like, oh no, the importance of, having infants overwhelms any sort of need to carve out these, things that don't happen very often, the pregnancies that were caused by rape or incest. And I've seen some selective quotes I won't read here, which are just absolutely horrifying, but they're definitely taking the ball and running down center field. So Naomi, can we talk about what the Democrats are doing?
Really quickly. Joel and I know someone that worked in Saudi Arabia for 40 years and as a nurse, and she dealt with a lot of cases of incest in the Middle East. And she said that there was a lot of issues that came out of multi-generational incest, due to they don't have laws on incest or rape there either. So hearing about the fact that the United States is also thinking about passing these laws and not having exceptions is just making me think that we're moving towards more Middle Eastern thought processes. Specifically because I saw a video the other day talking about the fact that just what Joel was saying about rape and incest. And he was like, oh, well, this is happening in Afghanistan. Just kidding. This is happening in the United States. And I was like, oh, I actually believed him for a second. So
I want to push back against that because a lot of people have been referring to this as Sharia law in the United States. And in many instances, Muslim law is much, much more permissive on when people can get abortions and the medical access that they can get. This is very much Muslims. A conservative Christian that you specifically said Middle Eastern. And I
said Middle Eastern. I didn't say Muslims. I said Middle Easterns.
I think even broad brushing like that and saying an entire swath of the planet is concerning. We need to be selective in our language because I think there's going to be a lot of finger pointing and there's going to be a lot of attempts to destabilize movements that are trying to solve this problem. And it's important to take this opportunity to make allies rather than make enemies.
Okay.
So I want to talk about why Democrats suck and how we should hate them. Speaking of allies. Okay, so I would say Naomi and I both identify as fairly progressive individuals. It's kind of hard to tell these days because, if you think that people should deserve healthcare and not go bankrupt, for some reason, that's an insane proposition in the United States national political scene. If you think that college should be, far lower in cost or God forbid, even free, and that people shouldn't go bankrupt trying to get a higher education, that for some reason brands you a socialist. If you think it's absolutely insane that people are homeless in this country when you have 10 times the number of empty homes as homeless individuals, for some reason that makes you progressive, when that seems like a pretty reasonable thing that a humane society would be like, oh yeah, that's something we should support. But yeah, I would say for the most part, we identify as progressive, and the Democratic Party has just repeatedly dropped the ball on this issue. And then not only have they dropped the ball, they are continuing to fumble with the ball. The ball is in their hands and they're it just keeps slipping out of their fingers. They grease their hands before they walked onto the field. One really good example is Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi right now in the last couple of weeks has been campaigning for Henry Queller, an anti-choice candidate in Texas. So like the day after this draft opinion is leaked, Pelosi is out there talking about why Queller is the right person for the higher offices of the land and how he's the person that's going to make sure women's rights are protected. And you might say, well, this is a very strategic decision, and that by bringing him on board, this is going to open up the Democrats to like other opportunities such as infrastructure. To which I ask, what infrastructure, what education, what are the major legislative accomplishments? But I feel it's also worth talking about how Roe versus Wade has been around for 50 years and the Democrats have really done nothing. So there's a Jacobin article from, let us see, it didn't even have a date on it. That's interesting. There was a Jacobin article from the beginning of this month written by a couple of people, Julia Rock, David Sirota, Matthew Cunningham Cook, and Andrew Perez, which talks about what the Democrats have done in the last 50 years. But the likely end of Roe versus Wade isn't just due to careful conservative plotting to overturn the law. The article does discuss how conservatives have for years been selectively chipping away at the abortion law to make this case much easier to push through. It's also courtesy of Democrats' refusal on many occasions to safeguard reproductive rights from such political dismantling, despite being a party mostly comprised of pro-choice politicians. Roe versus Wade has been the law of the land since 1973, but its standing has always been tenuous. Democrats at the national level have not prioritized codifying reproductive rights and expanding abortion access during the periods when they've controlled the presidency and both houses of Congress, just as they do now. In 2009, when Democrats held the presidency and large majorities in Congress, Obama was eager to straddle the abortion divide, according to reporting from the New York Times. In 2007, on the campaign trail, he promised Planned Parenthood that the first thing I'd do as president would be to sign the Freedom of Choice Act, which effectively codifies Roe versus Wade. Now, in 2009, after he was elected, he said the bill was not his highest legislative priority, as he put it at a recent news conference. The legislation to codify Roe sat in committees during that Congress before Republicans swept the 2010 midterms. Again, that's what happens in midterms. Today, for the first time since 2010, Democrats once again control Congress and the presidency. That means they still have the power to pass legislation codifying Roe into federal law. Here's the catch. They would have to end the Senate filibuster, which requires 60 votes to pass most legislation, and doing so would require them to apply real pressure on lawmakers in their own party amid the anti-choice movement's ongoing campaign to preserve filibuster rules. Democrats would need to have support from the entire Democratic caucus to end the filibuster and pass their abortions right bill, since the Senate is split 50-50, and no Republicans are likely to support either move, even though Republican senators Lisa Murkowski and Susan Collins claim to be pro-choice. After the House passed the bill to codify Roe last fall, Senator Joe Manchin in March joined every Republican senator in voting against it. Corporatist Senator Kristen Sinema, Democrat of our state, of the fair Arizona, says she supports codifying Roe, but it's all meaningless spin because she still opposes ending the filibuster. Manchin opposes ending the filibuster too. On Tuesday, President Joe Biden, who once supported letting states overturn Roe, wouldn't even endorse ending the filibuster to protect abortion rights, even though he previously endorsed a plan to make an exception to the filibuster to try to pass voting rights. As a senator, Biden diverged with his party numerous times to vote in favor of the so-called Hyde Amendment, which prevents federal funds from being used to pay for abortions. And while Biden has been intervening in primaries against progressive candidates, he has shown no appetite for using the most powerful office in the world to pressure the corporate holdouts in his party to help him protect abortion rights. That includes anti-choice Manchin, who even recently taped an ad bragging about blocking Biden's domestic agenda. Democrats have further sabotaged their ability to reify reproductive rights by continuing to welcome anti-abortion politicians into their caucus. For example, this is what I was just talking about, Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Majority Leader Steny Hoyer, and Majority Whip Jim Clyburn are supporting the re-election bid of Texas Representative Henry Queller, the last anti-choice Democrat in the House, against a progressive Latina woman pro-choice challenger. Clyburn is even scheduled to campaign with Queller on Wednesday. In 2017, Pelosi suggested that abortion was fading as a political issue and insinuated that Democrats were too focused on the matter. Then there's the fact that Biden has appointed a Democrat who's undermined abortion access in his own cabinet. In January 2021, he appointed former Rhode Island Governor Gina Raimondo as Secretary of Commerce. As governor, Raimondo negotiated a budget agreement that required some plans on the state insurance marketplace to exclude coverage for abortions. I don't think voters in Rhode Island really know what Governor Raimondo's done that has really violated the reproductive rights of women and threatened their health. Former longtime NARWAL pro-choice America leader Kate Mitchellman told Uprise about that deal. Mitchellman and Gloria Steinem, among other prominent abortion rights activists, endorsed Raimondo's primary opponent Matt Brown in 2018 due to her record on abortion rights. So that's where the Democrats are right now. The filibuster is a antiquated, not in the Constitution means of preventing states from passing legislation to help people. There are far more people in the states that are attempting to codify Roe rights into law than there are people in the states that are opposing it. But the Senate is designed in such a way that the minority can still unduly influence legislation. So the filibuster is this weird, old, antiquated rule that isn't even really a rule. It's just kind of an expectation that they could overturn at any time. And a smart political party would be putting pressure on the people within their party, making deals or just actively threatening them to get their agenda done. Because that's kind of what power is meant for. Power is meant to be wielded. Power is meant to get things done. And if there are big pressing issues like Republicans gerrymandering states so that Democrats can never win in them again, and entire minority communities being unable to vote for representatives who actually represent their issues, you'd think that that would be important enough. But now we have this extra issue that could be resolved if you were to get rid of the filibuster, which is women's reproductive rights. And it's an issue the Democrats are running on and attempting to make money off of, but not actually doing anything to implement. And it's doubly frustrating because you have people like Obama and even Joe Biden to a limited extent who ran their entire presidential campaigns on this idea of codifying it and then did absolutely nothing because they realize how valuable it is of a tool if women's reproductive health is constantly in the balance to get voter turnout. Good stuff.
I think that we mentioned this the last time we talked about an abortion. Last time we had an abortion episode was the fact that Vice President Kamala Harris was up in front of the Senate and said something like, oh, we need to protect Roe v. Wade and blah, blah, blah. And Joel was just shaking his head being like, you could literally be the one that does that. And she didn't do jack shit.
Yeah, so it's not that we're saying that the Democrats are a horrendous political party, but they kind of are. They're moderately better than the Republicans on a lot of issues, but ultimately they're not doing the things that the people who elected them actually want passed. And they're very heavily influenced by donations rather than doing what's right. And you might say, well, the majority of the Democrats are aligned in such a way that would imply that, all they have to do is remove people like Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema to get what they want done. But that's not really the case because they've done no efforts and actively have endorsed Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, right? And Joe Manchin is not a person with a sterling record. He's a coal baron who actively opposes legislation that would help prevent climate change from ruining the planet. His daughter's been involved in some very shisty business deals. All you have to do is casually say, hey, we're going to start investigating, insider trading and, what's going on with your daughter. And you could probably get him to fall in line. And there may be some people listening to this who are like, Joel, that's not how politics works. Politics is about doing the right thing. I don't know where you're coming from because there's one political party that whenever they're in power uses this an opportunity to just absolutely devastate the government and make life miserable for the majority of the country. And there's the other political party that when they're in power refuses to do anything. And you can't compete if the enemy doesn't care about you. You can't fight effectively if the opposition party actively wants you to die. That's not an effective strategy electorally. And I think we need to think much more critically about fighting and what it means to use political power to achieve good ends.
Well, it's not even about being voting the right person in at this point, because when it gets to the point where we had certain senators in this state, and I think Joel knows who I'm talking about, who started off with good intentions and now is just feeding on the pockets of corporations like the rest of them. So it's hard to even know if you're voting in the right person at the time because they could change their tune as soon as they get into office. And you see that all the time with presidents, like Joel was just saying, with both Obama and Biden, saying they were going to solidify this and didn't do jack shit. But you know what? That's just America for you.
I think this issue is even worse to an extent than Democrats want to talk about, because they're talking about it in terms of abortion rights without understanding this is going to have implications for a lot of other Supreme Court cases. So the main argument in the draft opinion that the Chief Justice Alito is utilizing is the idea that because abortion does not have a long history in the United States, because it isn't part of the United States tradition, and because it wasn't discussed in the Constitution, it's not a real right that needs to be protected. And that's a really interesting argument. And there's been a lot of people who have talked about how stupid of an argument it is legally. Just because, say, cell phones aren't in the Constitution doesn't mean we shouldn't have, privacy rights under, say, the Fourth Amendment against unlawful search and seizures. You need to extrapolate some stuff, or at a certain point accept that the document is too antiquated to use and, call a constitutional convention. But then there are the other cases that are probably going to be impacted that conservatives are already gearing up to fight. So this is from a Twitter thread by A_H_Riami, REAUME, which discusses the cases that might be impacted. So Lawrence versus Texas. Decided in 2003, the court used the right to privacy, which is established in Roe, to determine that it's unconstitutional to punish people for committing sodomy. The Roe ruling could open the door for criminalizing homosexuality. More accurately, it could just allow states to selectively criminalize homosexuality. So, I'm sure no state will take them up on that offer. Griswold versus Connecticut. Decided in 1965, this case protects the ability of married couples to buy contraceptives without government restriction. This isn't just about abortion, it's also about the ability to even prevent pregnancies at all. Multiple officials have already been on the record saying they're interested in preventing women and men's access to things like condoms and implants. So for men who are sitting on the sidelines thinking that this is an issue that won't impact them, it is going to impact you. For both people who have a partner and people who are looking for casual sex, this is completely going to change the dating landscape and long-term relationship landscape.
It's also an issue of just health. There's a lot of women that use implants like IUDs in order to help regulate their hormones, and also ensure that people that have endometriosis that have awful symptoms, they use those non hormonal implants like IUDs in order to regulate their hormones and ensure that they're staying healthy and not in pain all the time. And that would be an entirely other issue.
Yep. There's also little cases like Loving versus Virginia. This 1968 case, which threw out laws banning interracial marriages, was decided based on the right to privacy. If a state wanted to prohibit who people could marry, there's no protection to that without a right to privacy. Stanley versus Georgia. This 1969 case found that there is a right to privacy around possession of pornography. If states want to outlaw pornography or certain forms of adult pornography, it could do that without the right to privacy. Oh, and then there's a little case called Obergefell versus Hodges, the 2015 opinion that legalized same-sex marriage used the right to privacy and the Equal Protection Clause to do so. This ruling could open the door for a state to try to test same-sex marriage laws, which they want to do. Meyer versus Nebraska. This 1923 ruling allowed families to decide for themselves if they want their children to learn a language other than English. This could open the door for racist states to try to outlaw learning their families' languages. That's an important issue in Arizona, which is a majority minority state, which is a little silly sounding, but basically there's more Hispanic people in the state of Arizona than there are white people. It's 34.4% versus 34.2%. It's very close. But many years ago in the early 2000s, there was a couple of people who were trying to make English the only language allowed in the state, specifically trying to ban things like Spanish. And, we were just out at lunch earlier. I was out with my parents, and we was still sick. And there was a couple speaking in Chinese right next to us during their entire meal. They were speaking in unbroken Chinese, probably Mandarin the entire time. And that potentially could be outlawed as well. Skinner versus Oklahoma. This 1942 ruling found that it is unconstitutional to forcibly sterilize people. The Roe ruling could open the door for criminals, disabled people, or people of color to be forcibly sterilized. So those are some of the big cases. There's probably a lot of smaller ones that smart conservative scholars are salivating over getting rid of. It's a little concerning because that's basically all relationships that would be impacted, whether you are heterosexual or homosexual, whether you are cisgender or transgender, whether you are dating someone who is the same race as you or someone who isn't, whether you have sex or you don't have sex. Those are decisions which could completely alter how you conduct yourself. And they all are kind of contingent on the same logic as what is being shot down in this draft decision. So this is a big deal. And again, the party controlling every house in the federal government is not utilizing their power to do anything about it. So I do think it's worth noting that Jacobin's article had a couple of suggestions for how Democrats could use their power. And if you want to like scream and shout about voting and contact your senators, that's great. But there are tangible things you should be asking them to do. Right? It's not enough to say you're angry about this issue because they know you're angry about the issue. That's what they campaign on, right? What you need to be asking them to do is implement certain policies. So let's talk about what Jacobin says. Despite Democrats squandering opportunities to protect reproductive rights, there's no reason they can't change right now. Biden can use his executive authority to improve abortion access. Blue states can move to entrench abortion rights. And Democrats can take on the minoritarian institutions that are stripping away fundamental rights against popular will. Biden, for example, could use his sweeping executive powers to increase access to abortion. Yes, such a move could be overturned in the courts, but that development would represent an embarrassing about-face for the Roberts Court. In January, the court ruled in an unsigned opinion in Biden versus Missouri that the administration's vaccine mandate requirement for workers in healthcare settings was legal, saying this rule thus neatly fits within the language of the law. After all, ensuring that providers take steps to avoid transmitting a dangerous virus to their patients is consistent with the fundamental principle of the medical profession. First, do no harm. It would be the very opposite of efficient and effective administration for a facility that is supposed to make people well to make them sick with COVID-19. That language could be reasonably applied to an executive order from Biden mandating that virtually all hospitals with the capacity to do so provide medically necessary abortions. All centers for Medicare and Medicaid services providers, effectively all hospitals, could be bound by such an order. While the Hyde Amendment could present difficulties since it specifically bans the authorization of federal funds for abortion, nothing in its language limits the administration's ability to ensure abortion access. Less controversially, Biden could use the powers of the FDA to ensure access to the so-called abortion pill, mifepristone. I probably butchered that. He could do so by seeking to preempt state regulations that limit access to the pill, since drug approval is the FDA's sole domain. At the state level, meanwhile, 16 Democratic-controlled legislatures have moved to codify Roe into state law in recent years. There's more they could do to expand access. Rhode Island, Delaware, and Nevada are the only 3 states with Democratic trifecta control or veto-proof legislative majorities that do not use state Medicaid funds to ensure abortion access. Those states could pass laws to do so, expanding coverage for low-income people seeking abortions. Blue states that already ensure Medicaid abortion coverage could also work to expand abortion access to people who will likely soon be arriving to access abortion and reproductive health care clinics within their borders. For example, Illinois, which is surrounded by 6 red states set to enact sweeping abortion restrictions, could open public abortion clinics staffed by unionized state health care workers in towns and cities across the state. It could do so by leveraging its budget surplus of $444 million. Likewise, Maryland could do the same as a gateway in the South, where abortion rights restrictions will be rampant. While the state has a Republican governor, Democrats hold a supermajority in the legislature, and it is a huge budget surplus that is as high as $7.5 billion. States could also provide modest assistance, such as transportation, food, and lodging for those traveling from out of state to seek abortion care. Unfortunately, Jacobin reached out to top Democrats in California, Maryland, and Illinois to ask what steps they're willing to take to ensure access to abortion care. None returned a request to comment. In New York, meanwhile, Governor Katie Hochul recently thwarted a proposal to increase funding for women's health centers. Finally, there are important steps Democrats can take right now to chip away at minoritarian rule by the right. After all, if there is ever a case for expanding the Supreme Court to make it more reflective of the public's desires, this is it. The approximately 100-member Congressional Progressive Caucus has endorsed legislation to add 4 seats to the higher court. Maybe the Roe versus Wade disaster will spur the party to action. The Washington Post today said that Democrats finally have something they have lacked in this perilous midterm election year, a compelling message. However, and this is a message that I feel is worth really honing in on, Democrats only need a new message because Biden and Democrats have failed to deliver on so many of their ambitious 2020 election promises. That includes implementing a public health insurance option to compete with abusive corporate insurers, aggressively investing in a green economy, passing a higher minimum wage, and expanding union rights. Even with this supposed midterm gift, one that comes with tragic consequences, Democrats face a massive uphill battle in the 2022 elections. The potential Republican route could result in even more abortion restrictions, including in key states like Pennsylvania, where Governor Tom Wolf is the only barrier against expansive abortion restrictions proposed by the Republican legislature. Ooh. Ooh. So I want to make it clear that there's a very good likelihood that Republicans are taking over the government in 2022. Is there a small chance Democrats maintain it? Sure. But even if that is the case, they have consistently failed to do really anything that could reasonably preserve women's reproductive health care access.
Just
and it doesn't sound...
Point. They're just a barrier at this point. Like, they're making sure that like the Republicans aren't moving forward any more than they were. Well, or slower than they were.
Yeah. So I feel it's worth talking not in terms of what I'm seeing a lot on social media, where people need to turn out and vote, and more in the terms of what actually gets stuff done. And it's my belief that protesting and making lives difficult for people in positions of power and corporations can be very, very effective at accomplishing great things. I feel it's a big problem that A, a lot of people in America don't take civics classes, but B, even if they do, they think their civic responsibilities are showing up to vote every couple of years and maybe attending jury trials. There's really no understanding that being part of a democracy involves showing up and like forcing change sometimes. You can't always sit on the sidelines and expect other people to do it for you. So I think, yeah, protests are important. And I think there's a couple of things that both men and women can be doing to like make it clear that they are deeply opposed to this issue and they're going to make life difficult if stuff doesn't change. So one of the first immediate things, which relates to our podcast, is online dating apps. Naomi, you've used online dating apps, right?
I have, yes.
Well, one suggestion that I saw on the subreddit 2X Chromosomes about 2 weeks ago is that you should change your Tinder bio, or whatever your bio is on different dating apps.
My Tindo bio?
Your Tinder bio?
You said Tindo bio.
That was not my intent. Is this going to be a Robert Downey Jr. versus Robert De Niro problem again?
Yes.
Okay. Changing it to say something along the lines of deactivated because Roe versus Wade was overturned, no sex without human rights. And then don't delete the app, but keep it on your phone. It will continue to be circulated through. And the more and more women who are utilizing it, the more young men looking for sex might be inclined to start changing how they vote. It's a very
something I would like to add to that is that like your when you don't use the app for like 2 weeks or so, I think it is, it'll stop circulating. So every so often you need to go back on and keep it.
Okay, but it's still a very, very minor thing. And I think if you're looking for a way to make a difference, I'm not saying this is life-changing, but it's definitely something that can influence your community in the right direction, whether a community is largely progressive or largely conservative. So then let's talk about protests. There's going to be a lot of rallies. There's going to be some riots. There's going to be people showing up at Supreme Court justices and senators' houses and offices. It's my belief that protesting outside government buildings is probably a lot less effective than protesting outside of judges' homes. There's a big reason for that, where typically, if you're protesting outside a government building, they're not in session. And even if they were, they kind of consider that part of the job. If you're protesting outside someone's home, they can't ignore you, right? It's difficult to sleep. It makes them feel awkward. It makes their neighbors start pressuring them to do stuff. In some cases, there were protests outside, I think, Kavanaugh's house, and his neighbors were the ones who actually organized the protest to begin with. So it's not like even outside actors are coming into the community to make life difficult. But there's also a really big benefit of protesting in residential areas, and that's the police can't use tear gas. If you're in like a government area outside, like your city hall or outside your state capitol, it's pretty easy for them to disperse tear gas. But in a residential community, it looks really, really bad when the police deploy tear gas and suddenly have gassed a bunch of children in the neighborhood. It's not as easy to deploy when you have other people who are in the area who are affected. When you're at protests, I think there's also etiquette you need to keep in mind. Don't talk to the police. There's probably going to be a lot of people who are trying to gather information. And if somebody is like interested in knowing more about you and who you hang out with and, your home address, maybe don't share that information. Don't take photos. There's going to be probably more and more restrictions, and participation in protests could be a crime and already is in some areas. So don't make it easy for them to identify people who are involved in protests. Don't sign up for protests. If somebody's like, hey guys, I'm organizing a thing on Facebook, don't hit like I'm attending, because that can be used against you as proof that, oh, you showed up to this riot and thus we're going to charge you with a crime. And then if you see somebody, asking for you to sign ballot initiatives, codifying things like abortion rights, maybe think twice about doing that, because it could just be somebody who's a bad actor trying to gather information of people who are interested in getting abortions. So maybe look up the issue and sign it online later. It's not the highest priority. It's important. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of good ballot initiatives can accomplish, but it doesn't need to be done immediately.
This is a leave no trace way of doing things. So like when you're out hiking at or you're at a national park or something and they're like, leave no trace, it's like this.
Yeah. Now, why is all this important? Well, first, as I mentioned, sometimes protesting can be a crime, and I fully anticipate after 2020 and 2021's BLM protests, and after what I expect will be some very controversial abortion protests, there's going to be even more restrictions on what constitutes like peaceful assembly. And so even being present at a given area could sweep you into a dragnet. But I think it's worth keeping in mind that sometimes the police just want to gather your data and accuse you of things down the line. So keep your digital privacy secure as well. So the Electronic Frontier Foundation had an article in 2020 talking about kind of preventing yourself from being tracked. And they had a couple of suggestions, one of which is enabling full disk encryption on your phones or whatever electronic devices that you're bringing with you. Basically, full disk encryption can protect everything from your local database of text messages to the password stored in your browser. If your device is confiscated by police or if it's lost or stolen, full disk encryption can help protect the data stored on your device. Protest situations are often unpredictable, so losing your phone is a distinct possibility. Android and iOS have long required full disk encryption capabilities be built into devices. These should be protected by a strong password, so change your password if you can, 8 to 12 random characters that are easy to remember and type in when you unlock your device. If devices are not protected by a strong password, the encryption may be easier to break using brute force attacks, which the police have access to. It's important to note that encrypting your device will likely not encrypt external storage media such as SD or flash memory cards. You may have to encrypt those separately. In terms of passwords, it's very, very easy to come up with a long password. The suggestion that I've heard for a while is string together 4 random nouns and come up with a sentence that you can remember, but no one could ever guess. I think XKCD, the webcomic, had the suggestion, and it was like correct horse battery staple, where a horse is labeled as correct for knowing what a battery staple is. But that's a very long password. That's like 22 characters or something, where it is basically impossible under existing methods to break into a phone that's secured with it. So string together some, large nouns, maybe add a couple numbers and random characters, and you're good to gold. Good as gold. I was trying to combine good as gold and good to go, I think, and that's what resulted. One thing that's very convenient is fingerprint unlocks and face IDs. And a lot of people don't know that the Supreme Court has ruled that police officers can force you to unlock it using those things, either pressing a phone against your finger or holding a phone up to your face to unlock. The only thing they can't do is force you to enter a password. So before you attend protests, remove both of those options and only allow password access. Don't utilize those.
General audience, you're saying, like, let's just say worst case scenario, you get pulled aside at a protest and the cop is like, open your phone. What are they looking for?
they're looking potentially for elements of criminal conspiracy. The Department of Homeland Security published a memo, I want to say last year, talking about anti-abortion activists, environmental activists, and even BLM activists as being on par to gangs and terrorist organizations. So look, we've had a lot of issues in the Phoenix area where the former Maricopa County Prosecutor's Office made false accusations against people who are not affiliated, claiming they're part of a gang. There was, I want to say, criminal charges against like 9 people for being a part of the ACAB gang, the ACAB gang, which doesn't exist. They just pretended there was this thing called the ACAB gang. And these people had all shown up together and they're like, well, they were all wearing similar clothing and they were all shouting the same thing. So they had like a motto and they were like intent on doing us harm. So they'll lie about this stuff. Because keep in mind, a lot of police are opposed to the policies that we're discussing. A lot of the police are opposed to things like community investment over investment into the police. And so they're looking, who do you know in your network? Who are you connected to? What apps are you utilizing? What emails, what correspondence are on the device? And it could just be they, decide to copy your entire memory card and search it at their leisure at a later date. They don't have to do it all at once. They have a lot of options. So yeah, remove your fingerprint unlock, Face ID, make it as hard as them for possible to search through your phone. But maybe even don't bring your phone to a protest. This is something Electronic Frontier Foundation suggests, because even if your Wi-Fi is turned off, people can still track your SIM card. They still know you're attending these things. And we'll discuss why that's important in just a second. But yeah, you can go without your phone. The only important thing then is make sure you have a ride and that you have a backup option in case you can't get a ride home. Don't be caught out after dark, because I assume that curfews are going to be a thing soon enough. We'll see. I could be wrong about that. And then the other suggestion they had in terms of messaging apps is to install Signal, which is an app available on both iOS and Android that offers strong encryption to protect both text messages and voice calls. So that way, again, if they get into your phone, they can't break into your messages. It's very helpful. I think a lot of journalists use Signal for confidential conversations with sources, but that's a really good way to protect your privacy. Okay, so we're talking about protests. We're talking about all this stuff. Why are we talking about information privacy? Well, there's 2 reasons for that. The first one is people can track where you're going with your phone. In fact, they can track a lot of your activity using your phone. And this is concerning because there's a lot of people who now realize there's potentially money to be made in figuring out who's getting abortions because Texas has their $10,000 abortion bounty law. So I did see this tweet thread by EC McLaughlin at EC McLaughlin talking about the importance of stopping your use of online period tracking or cycle apps. Basically, all that data people can purchase and then sell to the highest bidder. And if somebody was, say, interested in figuring out whose period had stopped and who potentially is pregnant, and then who all of a sudden was getting periods again, even though they should be pregnant, that would be very, very easy to figure out. Keep in mind that Peter Thiel, a tech billionaire in charge of such crazy companies as Palantir, which is designed to combine information and make intuitive connections so that surveillance companies can filter through and identify bad actors more easily. He's already selling information to groups like the CDC, and that was used to track whether or not people were getting together for religious ceremonies or getting together for at the bar during COVID curfews. So it's not a new thing that somebody would be selling your location data. And if, say, they knew that you had stopped getting your period and that you were in the location of a Planned Parenthood in a certain period of time, it'd be very easy for them to make the case that you had an abortion, legal or otherwise. There's also a handful of people who are trying to get rich off of selling the data of any person to secure an abortion. There's a group called SafeGraph, which attempts to gather data and then sell it to people. This was a tweet thread I saw from @Nandoodles. So there's a number of people who are coming up with an organization that will connect law enforcement to women who are seeking or have already obtained abortions. These are all people who have significant experience in the tech industry. They will really not have to develop any new technology to make this happen. It's just gathering data that's already publicly available and putting it into a more convenient context for people to sift through. So again, if there's money to be made off of women getting abortions, somebody who doesn't give a shit about women is going to make money off of it. They're going to take the opportunity. This is going to be a big thing people invest in. I would not hedge your bets and think you can continue acting with digital impunity, because somebody will take advantage of that fact. Am I being crazy, Naomi?
Sorry, I have to mute and unmute because I'm coughing and hacking and stuff.
Lovely.
I don't think you're being crazy. I think that a lot of what we're going through right now is kind of reflecting back on the BLM protests. So I think that we some of us have been through this training. If you progressives out there listening to our comments and our podcast, I would say that it is extremely important to stay safe during this time. And if you can, even if you're being overly precautious, it's better to do that than, have a bounty on your head. So that's just my perspective.
Yeah. Wear your masks at protests, both for the sake of your privacy, but also because there's a lot of people in a tight-knit space and COVID is still very real. Make sure that you don't get sick and potentially disable yourself as a result of you attempting to do the right thing and support women. But I think it's worth hammering home the idea that simply protesting might not change things. Like, yeah, making people's lives miserable who support these policies is one thing, but in many cases, they already know people hate them and they already have their lives being affected by protests and people throwing things on them like animal blood. So consider that there's other options too. One thing that I've seen made reference to a couple of times was a Mother's Day strike, where for the week of May 8th through May 15th, people just wouldn't spend money. I would say there were two problems with that. The first is it was a very short period of time between when the decision was released and when they said, hey, let's do a Mother's Day strike. These things take time. They take a lot of time to prepare. They take a lot of time to disseminate. You can't just immediately expect that a bunch of people are going to be tuned into what's going on and be able to drop everything and participate in that. But I think the idea of a financial strike makes a lot of sense because 83% of all household spending is done by women. And if women all of a sudden, even 10%, 20% of women just decided to stop spending money on non-essential goods, the economy could squeal to a halt really, really quickly. And if the government cares about one thing, it's keeping the economy working. It's keeping the economy functioning and making money for people at the top. And so I think that has a pretty high chance of doing some good. And again, it's one of those things where you don't really have to make giant alterations to your lifestyle in order to accomplish a lot of good. General strikes can do a lot of good, and even miniature versions of them can accomplish great things.
Yeah, I heard about the Mother's Day strike. I think that it was it wasn't well organized, but two, I would say that during this time, I think it's very hard to not buy things, particular because there's a formula shortage. And if you can, let's just say if you need to run out of your house and buy formula at any given moment, and your friend calls you up and they're like, bitch, get to the local Walmart, there's actually formula here, you're gonna run and get it. So there's
well again, non-essential.
No, I was hearing about strikes that were all items. They were
yeah. I don't think that's reasonable. People unfortunately need gas, people need food, people need to pay their rent. And all those things are totally fine. But for other kind of splurge purchases, like going out to eat at restaurants, buying, I don't know, alcohol, jewelry, cars, entertainment, that stuff can, very easily be dropped. And, maybe that's going to happen even without people doing a strike, just because the economy is going in weird directions right now. But yeah, it'll definitely make a difference. I guess it's worth mentioning too that it's probably worth preparing for the absolute worst and putting some information on a thumb drive somewhere about at-home abortion remedies. I don't want to get too much into this because I think it's worth putting a pin on that a lot of abortion, a lot of plants that can induce abortions can be poisonous, and if improperly prepared can cause horrendous pain, harm, and even death. So I really don't want to be out there giving homebrewed recipe versions of like abortion pills, but please consider that it may be a grim reality at some point, and over preparing is perhaps not even an option at this point. I don't know if there's such a thing as over preparing in this environment. That said, and this is the less drastic version of that, Plan B lasts 4 years. If you need to stockpile some Plan B right now, now would be the time. And Costco's around the United States sell it even to non-members for anywhere from $8 to $40, right? It's not the most affordable thing, but it can save you a huge amount of grief down the road. I would strongly suggest people stock up on some.
I would like to say 2 things. One, we are not recommending at-home abortions. I just like to throw that out there, for the simple reason that it may cause more harm than good. The second thing that we would like to say is that we would like you to stay safe. So obviously stock up on items that you need, but also make sure that other people have access to those items. So don't overindulge. And Plan B is not the only form of emergency contraceptive that you can use. There's other off brands that you can use that people aren't really aware of. So you can get them on Amazon, you can get them at Costco, you can get them at Walmart, and people usually just go for the Plan B because that's the thing that it is Plan B. Like that's what everyone calls it. So be aware that there's a lot of different off brands that are a lot cheaper, a lot more cost effective that you can stock up on as well.
Yeah. And I think, again, we want to reiterate that we are not trying to put people in precarious health situations, but I do think the pro-choice movement involves just that, offering people choices. And I think it's important people be aware that such things exist. We're not endorsing them, just in the worst possible scenario, if you feel you need to make accommodations for your health, those things are out there. So that's basically what I wanted to talk about today, Naomi. I did want to wrap up on one note, and I don't know, like, this is going to get us in trouble, but I don't know. I'm frustrated by the general direction of waves hands incoherently everything. There's a lot going on that I think is making a lot of people stressed. You know, you brought up the infant formula shortage, and that's just utterly horrifying that we're now in an environment where women can be forced to have children but not have any food available to feed them. You know, no one's really acting on climate change. No one's really acting on income inequality. No one's really acting on housing prices shooting through the roof. No one's really acting on the fact that, you know, gas is getting more expensive and electric vehicles are expensive, so you can't swap to them. It's stressful. And I think this is a good time for self-care and like doing things to keep you mentally well, connecting with people, making sure that you don't go stir crazy, because a lot of people are going through this and a lot of people would appreciate the opportunity to vent. But I think it's also worth asking yourself, at what point do you start burning things? And that seems like a kind of ridiculous question, but like, if the world continues in our direction, like, what's your cutoff, which is the point where you're like, I cannot continue to live in a world that allows such like horrifying things. This is the time that we need to start building guillotines and stuff. I'm not endorsing violence right now, but I do think it's a question a lot of people need to ask, because during the course of our podcast, we have seen only a negative trend for women's reproductive access in the United States. We have not seen a positive growth. We have only seen a negative trend for like the health and well-being of trans people in the United States. We've talked about other problems such as minority access to healthcare across the United States. We've talked about declining dating prospects for people across the world. And I think a lot of people just accept this as a part of life rather than realizing that, oh, you could change a lot with some Molotov cocktails. I don't know, Naomi, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm editing these portions out. Instead of Molotov cocktails, I'm going to put like ice cream with strawberries on top or something. Like, Jesus fuck. No, I understand what you're saying. And my favorite form of self-care is eating the rich. I'm just kidding. No, I
Doing
understand what you're
what?
saying. I said eating the rich.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I understand what you're saying. I just maybe there's a direct correlation between the ongoing of our podcast and all of these negative trends.
Oh no. No, I don't believe that. I think that there's a quote on my little whiteboard in my room that says what's true is true. Thinking otherwise doesn't do any different. And I think it's difficult for people to understand how bad some of this stuff is, but like willful ignorance doesn't help anything. Like you have to confront these realities head on. And there's a lot of people out there who want to make the world worse for you. Standing up to oppose that can accomplish a world of difference.
I think that what you said earlier about self-care is extremely important right now. Joel had asked me about a week ago if I wanted to go to a protest, which was last weekend, and I was like, hey, so great idea. Love to get out there. The issue is I need to self-care. There's been a lot going on and I can't decompress via protesting. So
And then you got COVID.
And then I got COVID, so I double couldn't go. So I think that right now the main priority is keeping yourself safe from COVID, pregnancy, other things of that sort, as well as ensuring that your voice is being heard. So maybe just going to one protest, or maybe just putting your foot in the water and watching a protest, or signing a campaign or something along those lines, but don't overexert yourself in a way. And I know all these women are coming forward and they're saying, well, this is our time to get loud and stuff like that. And it's like, yes, that is true. This is the time to get loud. But at the same time, there's a point where you need to be taking care of yourself and you need to be ensuring that you are okay so that you can help the bigger movement. It's not going to help anything if a part of the movement is unwell.
If you're a fan of casual sex, I know deleting your dating app may not feel like awesome. I do think it's a important protest mechanism. I would suggest this is a good time to purchase some nice self-care sex toys. I think a lot of men underestimate how much women need them in their lives. And I think a lot of women may discover during this period that they're much happier by themselves and can take care of their needs without the needs for other people. And I think that's a lesson that a lot of people in positions of power who are pursuing things like casual sex need to understand.
I would say that I think it's funny. Multiple things I think is funny. The first thing is I have several friends that have been celibate for several years. They were doing their thing and then now they're just celibate for the reasons unknown, multiple reasons. And they found that they can do what most men couldn't for them, if you're catching my drift. The second thing that I find
orgasms. They're having orgasms. We're a
trying
sex positive podcast.
We're trying to keep this podcast PG-13.
I said eat shit at the beginning of this. I think we're past that.
I'm just gonna censor everything with ice cream and rainbows. So that's the first thing. The second thing is I love that the politicians that are so pro-life right now have gotten news has broke that their mistresses got an abortion in the past or their daughter got an abortion in the past. I think that's so funny, for multiple reasons. And the third thing I would like to say is maybe talk to your partner if you have a friends with benefit situation or a boyfriend or a girlfriend or anyone that emits sperm in your life that you're having sex with, and talk to them about their perspective on the situation, because that might change your perspective on who you are having sex with. I have heard many women talk to their significant others, or just people that have uteruses talk to people that they're hooking up with that have sperm, and they come up with some surprising answers and have had to stop hooking up with said person that has sperm in their body because it's a harsh reality. You go to their house for one thing and might walk out with a child. So yeah.
I did want to wrap this up, but I think you're touching on another subject that's worth mentioning. Vasectomies and female sterilization. There's a not inconsiderable amount of people our age who are interested in never having kids, and this might be the time to look into getting those procedures. I know not everybody has access to affordable healthcare, but vasectomies can be as low in cost as $200 to $800, even without insurance. And with insurance, I saw some people talking on Twitter about how their insurance covered it for $20. I went through a long list of my insurance benefits before, and I think I would pay $200 for it. So it's like, yeah, that's not necessarily something everybody can afford right now, but it's also something that's going to prevent significant costs in the future and a lot of heartache. And if plan B is, $40 at a lot of Costco's, 5 of those is going to, pay for the cost of a vasectomy. I am well aware that vasectomies are easier to get than women trying to be sterilized. We live in a fairly sexist culture in that regard, where women aren't really trusted to have control of their reproductive options on either end of the aisle. So again, maybe have a talk with your partner if both of you weren't thinking of having kids, and have the person with the penis and the balls seriously pursue that. Talk to a urologist at a local clinic, talk to your insurance about options, whatever.
Go to your local Planned Parenthood and either go with your partner or go by yourself and figure out that option, because that can, and figure out it. You can even talk to them and get a consultation and ask them all your nitty-gritty questions and figure that out. I would say that is a great way of doing things, because that's ensuring you are being safe and all of your partners are being safe, and it is reversible. So it's a great option.
Sometimes.
Yes, unlike women's sterilization, it is reversible, and women do have to have a husband's approval and a child of each sex in order to be approved for sterilization. So
not always. It can be that bad, but there are some areas and certain clinic providers there. If you go to our Auntie network, they have a list of people who are known in each state to allow sterilizations without all of that rigmarole. Dig into it. Naomi, I think we've said what we need to said. I want to again impress upon people that we are trying to donate to abortion funds as much as we can with our limited resources, and we'll be pushing all of our Patreon money to that moving forward. We will continue to offer Patreon exclusive perks for people. So if you were thinking of signing up as a Patreon, I would do so now. We have some good content coming out soon. The other thing that I think is worth noting is we're going to continue producing comedic/amusing content. It feels a little weird because we both feel like shit right now, but I don't think we're necessarily going to achieve anything besides losing a lot of listeners by constantly complaining about all of the new developments. We will do our best to keep people informed and alert them of opportunities to help out and make a difference. But we're also going to continue trying to make a podcast that can make people laugh and reflect upon dating culture. And it feels weird right now. I'm thinking back, Jon Stewart did a piece after 9/11 where he's like, how do we tell jokes now that there have been, 2 buildings leveled in our city? It feels really weird. But yeah, we think it's important to make people laugh and not suffer, and we're going to continue doing that.
We're going to continue to talk about Steve Harvey. I'm just you know.
We do have a part 3 of Steve Harvey, which will come out sometime after this, and hopefully people can cringe and giggle in equal measure.
So many people reached out to me after that, and they're like, this is such a good episode. I was like, I'm sorry, you like talking about Steve Harvey. Okay. Anyways, we hope everyone has a great week. We're sorry that this came out so late, but for the reasons above, you'll understand why. Joel, do you have anything else to say?
I'm done. Stay safe, y'all. Reach out to us if you have problems. We will attempt to connect you with resources.
That is true.
We have many thanks for the use of our theme music, which is the song Drop by Ketsa. You can find more of their music online at ketsa.uk. You can also find Date These Guys online on Twitter and Instagram at Date These Guys, or visit our website at datetheseguys.org. If you have questions you'd like us to discuss on the podcast or marriage proposals for either of us, shoot us an email at datetheseguys@gmail.com.